We're going to be looking at the youth confab announced by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to kick off in Q1 2025. It's garnered mixed reactions, and we have two guests joining us to have this conversation. We have communications professional Muktar Suleiman. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And we also have the director of Humangle Foundation, Umoru-David. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
I'll begin with you, Angela. Let's talk about your general thoughts about the youth confab. It's been said that it is an opportunity for young people to come together for 30 days and the voices of young people to be heard. Would you say that young people haven't been speaking as much before now and they have much faith in the youth confab?
Again, thank you for having me. General thoughts on the conference. On one hand, I think because of the level of distrust that has existed in recent times between the populace and the government, there is the feeling that this is a performative gesture. But on the other hand, I would say that this is perhaps the first attempt that this particular administration has made to be proactive and to actually listen and invite people to the table for dialogue. So on one hand, it's a gesture of goodwill, but on the other hand, because of our past experiences, it's so easy to say that this is performative. Now, as to the other part of your question on whether or not youths have not been speaking loudly enough or they've not been talking all this while, I think our voices have been very, very loud for a very long time, for the longest time. If you're looking at it, even before NSAS, or even the End Bad Governance protest, or even what we even say on a daily basis on social media, or is it the youth representatives and the other organizations that represents the interests of youth as a whole. So the voices have been very loud and very clear. The concerns have been said over and over again. So on the other hand, again, another aspect of this conversation is at this point, I am not expecting that it is a new conversation in that sense of, what is it exactly that are your issues? The issues have been largely the same and consistent, and what young people in Nigeria have been saying has largely been the same. So this conference at this point shouldn't be an opportunity to suddenly be shocked and say, oh, are these the issues? The issues have been clear for a long time. We already know what they are. At this point in time is to actually chart the way forward and to also build on some of the other conferences and engagements that have happened in the past.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to bring in Muktar Suleiman now. Also to get your broad view on the idea of a youth confab. Do you also think that this is something that, maybe it's the current government's way of showing that it recognizes the voices of, the millions and millions of young Nigerians, and it wants to bring them into the conversation, and, it wants also to hear what they have to say? Is that your understanding of what this is?
Thank you again very much for having me as well. I think it is very, very important that there's a popular adage that says that to he who little is given, much is expected. And oftentimes, before you are trusted with more, you will have to see the utility or how you've utilized before you're trusted with more, we have to see how you've utilized the small that you were given. As my good friend Angela have actually said, these issues are very, very pronounced, and we already know what some of them are. And it's always very important that we call the demon by its name sometimes, so just so that it is very, very clear that we don't hide around semantics or ambiguities or abstracts. We know what the youths are asking for in terms of employment, in terms of access to education, access to basic amenities, and these are realities that undercuts, amenities that undercuts the very reality of everybody, whether you're young or you're old. And we just want to have decent living in the country where we call home. But the government has fallen short of those things. So if you're telling us that you want to call it 30-day confab, which I think it's outrageous, 30 days. I've been a host of a lot of conferences, a lot of seminars and events. If you keep human beings beyond 2 days, you lose their attention. If you keep human beings beyond 2 days, you've lost their attention. So I do not understand the thought that has gone into the fact that we want to keep people who are still looking for gainful employment. Even the ones that are employed are underemployed, and they are looking for how to make ends meet and keep bread on the table. You want to keep them for 30 days negotiating what I really don't know. So when we say that we want to go into the confab and you want the youth to come to the table, let's assume for the sake of argument that it's actually a good thing, which I don't think it is, but let's assume that it is. What then is the agenda? Because for every activity you're going to do, as a program person that I am, you have to have a concept note that talks about, oh, these are the objectives that we're going to do and these are the expected outcomes. And then you're talking about how you're going to monitor those particular outcomes. So my question to the government would then be, okay, where's the concept note at least? Make it popular, make it public so everybody can see it. Okay, this is what we are hoping that we're going to get out of this confab. This is what we are going to do after we get this out of this confab. Because the last national confab we had that Jonathan did, it's still just there lying fallow in a sheet of paper, and nobody has done anything about it. For me, I don't see it as any form of a means to an end. I see it as just a performative gesture, and as with most people, it's just a way of how some people can actually get some things for themselves as well, because a lot of money is going to be spent. If all of that money that is going to be spent, I can't wait to hear how much was actually spent eventually at the end of the day, because these things have a way of coming out in Nigeria. By the time they are done with all these things, I can't wait to see the amount and what we could have ordinarily used that money to do that would have benefited the larger part of.
So again, this is what I'm asking. So you don't interpret this as an opportunity for young Nigerians to speak their minds on the issues that bother them the most?
I think if the government actually wanted to elicit information from Nigerians, there are ways to go about it that would not require spending money on a very big conference. Trust me, if a simple I'm a communications person, yeah, and we know how to do targeted messaging. If a simple link comes to your email or to your phone as a text message, or on your YouTube page, or if we do targeted ads, and the Nigerian government then does take out time on mainstream media platforms to let everybody know that, oh, these particular links are from us. Please fill this link and tell us what you think we can do better. And somebody should sit down and do that analysis of that result. For me, it's way better because it shows that you're willing to put in the work to get the job done, as opposed to just having people come flashing into the banquet hall in State House and come and sit down. They'll say they're doing a youth confab. I don't think we should do that. Actually, I think it's an absolute waste of money.
All right, Angela, you can see other guest thinks that it's an absolute waste of money, and he doesn't think that all the young people should be brought together because it's a waste of time. And reference is made, and rightfully so, to the 2014 national conference that was put together by former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. So what would be your suggestions? There are those who say that our focus should be more about implementing, because there was a report from the 2014 national conference that is yet to be implemented. So what would you say about that? Should we maybe have looked at it, as opposed to now doing a brand new conference? Or, I mean, if there is no way that we can go back from this youth confab, how can we make the best of it?
I couldn't agree more with what Muktar has said, because the truth is there's so many things that have already been said. That's why I mentioned that from NSAS, the NBAD governance protest, and even what we say daily, on a daily basis on social media, the message is clear. The demands are obvious. Now, if you even look at some of the things or the way CONFAB was done in 2014, the youth representation was abysmal. I think there were about 490 people there, and then maybe just about 4% of them were representatives of NANS and then the National Youth Council of Nigeria. It was abysmal. So the chances of that being repeated right now with this particular conference is very high. Now, as to what perhaps may be done differently now that we are here, now that the government or this administration has announced that this is what they want to do, at this point in time, what I am expecting to see is that the process for the selection of the delegates would be made known. If you're saying that you want to hear the voices of the young people, then who are the people that are going to be representing these young people that you want to hear from? How are they going to be chosen? How inclusive is the selection process? How transparent is it? Because when we even talk about inclusion, we think, oh, let's just look at inclusion from this perspective. So, okay, we have young people, maybe aged between 18 and 29 or 18 and 35, depending on what framework we're looking at. But beyond that, you have to also talk about gender inclusion. You have to also talk about persons with disabilities and what kinds of disabilities, like the issues to consider when it talks about inclusion and the selection process. There's so many. So those are one of the things I'm expecting to see as regards this particular conference, now that we are at this point of the conversation, because it seems like the decision has already been made that the conference will hold, even if there are more efficient and effective ways to go about soliciting people's opinions, maybe through a digital referendum. Since we've already scaled past that and we're at this point of talking about a conference, what then is the selection process? What then, as Muktar also mentioned, is the agenda for the conversation? How are you going to follow through? And this also goes back to what I had mentioned earlier. This should not be a conference of asking afresh, what are your needs? What do you people want? What are the issues? No, this should be an opportunity to say, okay, we already know these are what the problems are, unemployment, and beyond even just unemployment, is even the fact that we really just want an enabling environment. We really just want a safe environment for different people. If we look at conflict-affected regions, which is one of the areas that my organization works so strongly in, you look at the fact that a lot of the people who are being engaged or disproportionately affected are young people, be they female or male. They are people that are most affected because they're the ones who are easily co-opted into these insurgent groups. And even in cases where you have conflicts, they're the ones who are suddenly become breadwinners. You have 14, 15, 16-year-olds becoming breadwinners. How are the voices of such people in even those remote areas going to be heard? It shouldn't just be a gathering of all the Abuja elites, so to speak. So yes, those are some of my points.
Yeah, so Muktar, let's bring you back in. What do Nigerian youth have to say? If you found yourself at a conference, or you have an opportunity to actually speak on behalf of young Nigerians, what are the things that you think Nigerians or the young Nigerians have to say? What would they want to say to the current administration? And also, in what ways can young Nigerians become, bigger players in deciding the trajectory of our country?
Nigeria, I would repeat what the president said during his campaign, which is let us breathe. And for now, I won't say let the poor breathe, but let's just let the youth breathe in the manner of speaking, because we cannot have a government that have strategically removed all forms of support that government should give to its citizens and expect that there's going to be a thriving environment for people who do not come from money. So I think that's also a big problem. In response to your question where you said, how can Nigerian youth be big players? We have been big players. It's just that we've not had a way to communicate what we want changed in a manner that is receptive to the people who actually have the power to change them. I don't think this CONFAB will make any difference, because let me tell you the truth. It's going to be a party affair at the end of the day. So the singular reason that it's going to be a party affair, that means that those people who are going to do the communiques, the repertoires, and people who are going to collate things are just going to go and sing the praises of the president. So he hears, oh, this is what the youth said. The youth said you are doing very well. So the pain points that are very, very instrumental, that needs to be communicated very strongly to the president, will not get back to the president. I don't see it happening. As someone who has been in the political space for a very, very long time, it's a lot of careful English, let me put it for lack of better terms. I'm trying not to use any vulgar language. It's a lot of carefully placed English pieced together in a way that just elevates the ego of those who are actually at the helm of affairs. And the God-honest truth, the sad part of it is that real meaningful change that affects human lives are made from positions that have political processes in them. How then do you get access to the political processes when the political processes itself is looking for ways to push you? I mean, look at the people who sang the praises of Buhari during the time of Buhari are the ones that have suddenly become open critic of President Tinubu. So it looks like whenever you are in the villa, what they say, if you are eating, you don't chop. If you are eating, you don't talk, because it's bad table manners. And I'm thinking that's the same circle until we find a way to break that circle in such a way that you can look power to the face and say, this thing is wrong. And we have to find a way to change it until we actually get there, where we get people who are bold enough to actually take this step, and not just one, because you can't get a forest with one tree, and not just one. We can do it collectively, whether you are in Aso Villa, or whether you are in the Senate chambers, or whether you are even selling bread in the market. You can look at power and money to the face and say, no. Whether you embody this much power, with much power should come much responsibility, and you're not taking enough responsibilities for the actions or inactions that you are supposed to take.
All right,
we need to change that.
Angela,
Yeah.
let's ask you the same question.
Exactly.
What do young Nigerians have to say? What is in the minds of the many young Nigerians, even those in the rural areas? What do they really want to say to the current administration, and also in what ways can they also play a bigger part in current day Nigeria without necessarily doing a youth conference?
So without, in an attempt not to even repeat all the beautiful points that Muktar has made, I'll add that I think it's very important that, or what young people really have to say at the moment, or are demanding, is to actually acknowledge the injustices that have been meted out to young people in this country. Because we can't heal or move past that if we suddenly sweep it under the rug and act like these things never happened. Consistently, over the years, there have been so many ways, so many ways that young people have met with really terrible systems, systemic inequality, systemic injustices. All of these things are some of the things that I believe that young people in Nigeria want to be addressed, because there can be no healing, there can be no moving forward without acknowledging these things and seeking to even repair the harm that has already been done.
Would you like to maybe share examples of some of these things that you think young people need to speak about to ensure healing?
Okay, should we even talk about the facts? Should we even talk about enter? That's just one example out of many. First of all, there was a lot of gaslighting to making it look like it didn't happen. And then you had people that were wondering that, did we all hallucinate? Was there some form of mass hallucination? That's one example. You don't turn around and abuse. It's just like being in an abusive relationship. You don't abuse people and then you turn around and act like, oh, nothing happened. That's one example. Or should we even talk about the End Bad Governance protest? That is another example. Then on a daily basis, is it from the policies that are made, from one particular education minister saying that, oh, you know what, if you're less than 18, you can't get into the university. Do we even realize the ripple effect of such policies on young people, what it suddenly means, how they suddenly are set back and they're unable to move forward? One more example I can easily give is even in the fact that you have a lot of young people participating in the creative and gig economy these days, but they do not even have the basic things that they need or enabling environment. These are things, forms of injustice that we should actually be acknowledging, or that should be acknowledged by those in political office. So those are some very easy, low-hanging examples I can give.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Angela Umoru-David, as well as Muktar Suleiman. Thank you both for your valuable contribution to the conversation this morning. I do also want us to quickly touch one more, on certain controversies that have arisen out of this before we end the conversation. As quickly as we can, let's talk about what your suggestion would be for the mode of selection, because that has been one area of controversy, that those who have alluded to the fact that they think, Omoyele Sowore thinks that the CONFAB is targeted at maybe just compensating the president's son's friends. And, there have been lots of controversies in that regard. So if you had to suggest to the presidency as to the metrics by which they will use to select representatives to attend the youth CONFAB, let's hear from the both of you. I'll start with Angela. What would be your suggestion?
Okay. Now, speaking as someone who's worked in the nonprofit space, we've done small-scale versions of large conferences like this over and over. And what you would do is to say, who are those who are most affected by these issues? Who are those whose voices that should be heard? So it's starting from that perspective, right? And then also thinking about it from the perspective of the people who are most affected are the ones whose voices should be centered the most. So you already know that we're talking about young people. Now, within the young people, there are different sets of intersectionalities that have to come into play. Intersections between gender and age, intersections around disability and age and gender, then intersections around educational background and access, and then other intersections like geographic spread. So if you want to do it on it's like a quota system, I would advise. If you want to do it on a geographic basis, you look at the 6 geopolitical zones, or even all states really, because even we are so diverse, or each state should make sure that we have representatives from minority groups and then the major groups as well, when you're talking about ethnicity, religion, and all of that. So once there's that kind of spread across the different forms of intersectionality, then we can say we are speaking. And to also make sure that, very, very important, people that are from even smaller communities. And then to also make sure that, because I know that another question that might arise in response to what I just said is, level of education and exposure to make sure that they can contribute meaningfully. We often assume that illiteracy in English is the only form of intelligence that there is. But then there are other forms of intelligence, and what we are going here for is not about who can speak the most elitist form of English. It's about what are your experiences, what are your needs, how best can you meet those needs. So this is a summary of how I think this process should look like.
All right, thank you for highlighting that.
Just to add, that time is already the essence, because if you're doing this in February, then this is too late to do something as large and as widespread as I have mentioned.
All right, let's hear from Mr. Suleiman. Do you have different suggestions other than the ones that Angela had just spoken about as to how we can ensure that there's adequate representation? Because it might seem that whether we like it or not, the youth confab will go on.
I think the selection criteria should not be restricted to certain specific people. I understand what it means to make it open, but isn't that the whole essence of government, for it to be open? So, because you can have, like I've attended the World Youth Forum, for example, the one that happens in Egypt. They used to happen in Egypt in the past, before COVID hit. And in the World Youth Forum, you have 8,000 delegates that attend the World Youth Forum in Egypt from different parts of the world. And yet that conversation is managed in such a way that you can have multiple conferences happening at the same time, and multiple panels happening at the same time. And then during the World Youth Forum, they usually pay attention to those people who raise their hand to ask questions during panels. They pay attention to those things, and then they call those people for a smaller meeting, and then with that smaller meeting, they have deeper conversations that then ties to the larger objective of the forum. So the point I'm trying to make is you don't necessarily have to keep it small. Open it, let everybody attend, and then find creative ways of ensuring that within the people who attend, you can find voices that are very, very eloquent, voices that are very, very strong, that are not strong on Twitter, but that day they have something to say. You can then pick them out carefully and then go sit with them somewhere else and then have deeper conversation with them. Of course, using the Chatham House rules where there's no recording and no reference to who they are.
Yeah. Also, I mean, Mr. Suleiman, just before you go,
yes,
there have been, a handful. It's not very many, but there's been a handful of young Nigerians who have made their way into, government spaces. Yes. Unfortunately, majority of them end up as special advisors here and there, but there's still a few that have made their way to, to Aso Rock somehow, some way, or to the National Assembly somehow, some way, or to some critical government spaces. Have you been pleased with the outcome, that these persons have brought, from their presence there? Is there any of them, or are you excited with what we've gotten from young Nigerians when they found themselves in governance?
Now, as someone who has done a little bit of work in the political space or in the governance space, this is something I will just tell you. I'm a realist. I'll just give it to you as it is. I do not trust the judgment of somebody who works very closely with any political office holder. Why? That person do not, oftentimes, it's very few. Oftentimes, those people don't tell their employers the actual truth. They just tell them what they think they want to hear so that they can have job security. So if I need somebody to speak on my behalf as a common Nigerian, I would not trust the person who is currently actively working inside the villa. I'm not going to trust that person's opinion. I'm not going to trust that person's to represent my own personal voice. I mean, like I said, you would see people who were very, very protective of Buhari's mishaps, currently being open critic of the current government of the day simply because they don't have appointments. There's this thing that FFK, Femi Fani-Kayode, as much as I don't like his approach sometimes, but there's something that he said. He said, if I work for the president, or if I work for somebody, my singular job is to protect that person as much as possible. I'm a communications person. If I lead the communications of a particular organization, maybe internally I'm going to say this thing, but externally, my job is to ensure that that organization is seen as the pilgrimage point of everybody who works in any other workforce. And that is just the reality of how special advisors or senior special advisors are always operate.
Yeah, all right. Muktar Suleiman, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And again, Angela, Umoru-David, thanks as well for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.